Okay, hi everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to our August Pulpwood Queen meeting, and I'd like once again to thank the Pat Conroy Center for hosting our meeting on Zoom and Jonathan for setting up the Zoom. Rebecca. This allows us avid readers to not only discuss the book, but to meet with the authors. And thank you again, Jonathan and the Pat Conroy Center. The September meeting will be held on September 15th at 6 p.m. and the book is Sisters of the Undertow, one of the bonus books of the month. I have sent Johnny Bernard a request to join us, and she said yes immediately and said we made her read. So I'm sure we're in for a lively discussion. And also as a reminder, Pat Conroy Center will be hosting a Zoom discussion between Donna Armour and Brooke McKinney about Donna's newly published travel memoir, Solo in Salento, on August 25th at 6 p.m. I'm betting this will be a lively session and hopefully I can attend. And the Pat Conroy Center would love for the Pulpwood Queens to join in support of Donna and Brooke if folks are interested and available. If you need the Zoom link resent, just let me know. Okay, now we have in our midst Claire Fullerton, who hails from Memphis, Tennessee, and now lives in Malibu, California, with her husband and 3 German Shepherds. She is the author of Little T, the August selection of the Pulpwood Queens. Claire is the author of 5-time award-winning Morning Dove, Dancing to an Irish Reel, and A Portal in Time. Her novella, Through an Autumn Window, is included in the book. Included in the book, A Southern Season. Her work has appeared in Celtic Life International, Southern Writers Magazine, and the Dead Mule School of Southern Literature, and others. Wow, it's a mouthful. Thank you, Claire, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, hello to the Pulpwood Queens, the Beaufort chapter of the Pulpwood Queens, and I want y'all to know 2 things. And the first is I've been to Beaufort twice, and I found it enchanting and charming, and the people there, within 5 minutes, everybody was my best friend. And I came to Beaufort twice. The first time was for the Pat Conroy at 70, his 70th birthday celebration, and I flew all the way from LAX to Beaufort, South Carolina. Well, I went into Charleston and then drove in to Beaufort. And I want y'all to know that my last dying breath, I will say that's one of the top 3 smartest things I've ever done in my life. Another one was moving to Connemara, Ireland, and not coming back. And so meeting Pat Conroy was on the par of the smartest thing I will ever do. And I want y'all to see this because it's on my desk. Can you see this picture?
Yes.
Is there glare? That is when Pat was signing The Prince of Tides, which I brought my copy with me because I'd read it at that point probably 2 or 3 times, for the language, for the rhythm of the language, for the way the sentences sing. And I want y'all to know that part of the reason I became a writer to begin with was it occurred to me, A, that I had an aptitude for it because I'd been keeping a journal since I was very, very young, with nobody ever suggesting I do that. And I believe that writers have a fundamental understanding that they should be pursuing it. Now, there is no there to get to if one is a writer, says me. It's just my opinion. But, and I think that it's a never-ending process. And I think that it's an inexplicable urge to communicate in an effort at reaching out and comparing notes on this business of life with your fellows. And by fellows, I mean anybody who reads. Because everybody that reads and everybody that writes, it's almost like we're in the same tribe, that we see the world through a very similar lens. And we are appreciative and we honor the written word and the spoken word. It matters to us how we communicate. And for me, I know that I greet the entire process with humility getting back to Pat Conroy, it might have been the 1980s or so when I first read The Prince of Tides. And it blindsided me because of one salient characteristic in the book. He talked about his family. And I grew up in the Deep South, and I am in my 50s. And I was of a generation when we did not go there. We did not discuss. It was unseemly. And my mother, who was wonderful, she was delightful, funny, smart, wonderful. She would say things like, well, you know, people really don't want to know your problems. And she meant it. And that was the way her entire generation raised my generation. We flat did not discuss the family. And so when I read The Prince of Tides, I couldn't believe where Pat Conroy went. I couldn't believe that he had done it. And it just opened up so many possibilities for me in terms of what became a search of what you can do and what you can say and where you can go with the written word. And I'm telling y'all, I didn't know this until Pat told me. Although I had always been what I consider an avid reader, books such as John Noel's A Separate Peace, you know, to my core. I'm big on the first person. When I read it, I prefer writing in the first person. I want to know who I'm talking to, you know, because I read deeply and personally, and I want to know who I'm talking to or who I'm listening to, as it were, because it turns out when you read, it's one and the same, that there is a dialogue of connection going on between the author and the reader, which is why Morning Dove that I wrote, and let me just wave my own banner, that book won 9 awards now, and that's a Southern family saga. And then with Little T, which I wrote without an outline, of course, I found myself, as I went into the narrator's backstory, talking about the family again, because I like the family dynamic. I like the way it shapes us. I like the skeletons in the closet, what it is that people fear, what it is that people hide. I'm huge on this, and how each of us, in one way or another, is in fact a product of the family into which we were born. And so without necessarily planning to do it in Little T, there I was again, talking about the family dynamic again. And as y'all know, Little T was written in the first person again. And so I do hope you like it when I wrote Morning Dove and when I wrote Little T as well. And I have 2 full novels prior to those, but for all intent and purposes, and with regard of the Southern family dynamic, you know, I'm always in my own way, laying my cards on the table in a way that I assume is universal, and that what I know, and even what I create, even what I manufacture, I do hope that the reader can say, oh, you too, because I can identify with that, or I find this interesting because mine's a little bit different, and yet there are similarities. And so I consider writing, which is a passion of mine, to be a way of reaching out so that readers are reading the same way that I do, which is very deeply and very personally. And they're saying, oh, you're letting me in on this. I can identify. And I like the idea of that, the idea of comparing notes, because, you know, summarily, an acting teacher many years ago, I was a theater major at the University of Denver, and I have a background in ballet, and you know, so it's the communicative arts, the theater arts, performance arts, whatever that I'm drawn to, because it comes easily enough to me. And so, but this acting teacher said, you know, there's not that many different ways to live, and I thought I will never forget that line as long as I live, because she was right. You know, there's not that many different ways to live. And so in writing, that to me is the point, is just to, you know, shed a spotlight on it so that everybody can say, you are putting into words what I have found to be, you know, with myself. I've been utterly inarticulate about this, but now that you bring it up, I see that you've got a point. And so that to me is what compels me to write, is just that. And I write with no distractions, no noise. I'm in my own room, and therefore in my own head, my own process. And it is a labor of love to me. And it feels to me like a life force. And that's how I have always written. I discovered that when I was writing poetry many years ago, that it seemed to me to be this wellspring that rose up like an energy or a force that almost moved through me, to the point where it's almost unbalancing if I don't write it down. You know, so my task is to take that energy and harness it and channel it and say it in a way that makes sense, if you will. So I assume y'all have read Little T. Has everybody read Little T?
No, they can't respond because they're all muted.
Oh, well, can we unmute?
Jonathan, there. Can we okay.
You can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
You can. Yep. Everybody's got their own control.
Oh, great.
Okay. So Karen and Rebecca and Dana, do you want to unmute, or do you have?
I just
Claire has asked us to unmute. Okay.
Hello, is that Kathleen?
It is. How are you doing?
Sweet thing. It's so great to hear your voice and see your face.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here.
What a pleasant surprise. Thank you for coming.
I'm glad you made it, Kathy.
I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Great. So shall I talk about Little T?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Do.
I think it's always fun to hear, you know, what were you thinking when you started writing Little T, or what was the point of that story? And I can tell you that I went into the writing of Little T wanting to talk about female friendships, about the kind that are very intimate and long lasting, perhaps the kind that originate in grade school, you know, but before high school even, and then last a lifetime. And I had that in mind. And what I really wanted to capture was the way that women speak to each other. Because there have been times in my life when I've been with a couple of girlfriends that I've known forever, and I have been able to sort of step outside of what's happening presently and be in witness mode of the way that we speak to each other and the way that we are so insightful. And with intimacy, it spawns an honesty as well. And, you know, back when I was thinking, you know, this is what my husband doesn't know about how women friends get together and just how wise they are and how deep they are. And that was what I wanted to capture. And so I began with a dilemma of three women that knew each other from a very early age, but yet hadn't lived in the same part or the same city for decades. So they're in their late 40s now. And I knew that there had to be a reason why they convened. And I gave one of them a problem. And that problem being, okay, she's on the fence about her marriage because she married young. And then 20 years down the road, she started, you know, getting a sense of who she was as a human being and thinking, you know, I wonder if I'm still compatible with this man now that I am in my late 40s, because I was compatible when I was 21, but now it's different. And I think that that's common I've heard that before with women that marry young, that they wake up with a sense of themselves and they start to question whether or not they, they're in the mood to continue with it for another 20 years. So it was that, and I gave her a drinking problem as well. And I'm fascinated with where people will go when they don't want to face what it is they really need to face. And so alcoholism or any kind of drug addiction or whatever, if you think about it, it's all incredibly understandable. And I think what's at the bottom of it is a crisis of the spirit in some shape, fashion, or form. And what it is trying to anesthetize yourself because it's far more comfortable than really facing what it is you need to face. Because if you're going to face it, you have to have the skills and the tool set, if you will. You have to be qualified, equal to the task, to face whatever it is that you don't want to face. And so with those issues in mind, and I was thinking of the idea of 3 women with 3 different personalities. So if you put this dilemma in their collective lap, well, then you're going to hear 3 different, assessments of what it is that's really going on. And I love the idea of that. So I had the girls reconvening at Greer's Ferry Lake in Heber Springs, Arkansas, which is beautiful. It's 360 miles of lakefront property. And there's an area named Tannenbaum that I've been to because it's about a 3-hour and then some drive from where I grew up in Memphis. And so I was familiar with it, and I thought, well, that's going to be a wonderful setting because it's neutral territory and it's on water, and water is fluid and an emotional element, if you will. And I like the idea of that. And there's certainly a lot that you can do when you put 3 women in a boat on water. So in writing Little T, I was 25 pages in when I realized I had to answer the question of, now, why doesn't the narrator want to fly down south from California to see? Why is she hesitant to join her friends at the lake? She does it because we'll do anything for our girlfriends, but sometimes it's a push and a pull, and I had to answer why to that. And so I started creating the narrator's backstory, and I had no idea what that was other than I said, well, let's have her grow up outside of Memphis. And 45 miles south of Memphis is an area called Como, Mississippi. And it's historically preserved. And it's an agrarian region. And I've been there, and it's wonderful. And the people that live there are tied to the land, and their forebears were as well. And so then I brought in Como, Mississippi. And I started answering the questions of, now, what would that have been like if these women are now in their late 40s? This would have put them in the 1980s. And what was that like? And what would it be like if you live on property in your family for generations, and you've established that there are cotton fields and soybean fields? Maybe there's a gin that the family owns. What's the weather like, and who's around her? And I said, well, of course, it's going to be a caretaker on property like that if you have these cotton fields and carrying on. And he's going to be Black. And does he have a family? And that's how I arrived at the character of Little T, whose real name is Thelonious, named for her father, whose name is Thelonious, because I love that name. And I know in the South, we always give our good friends nicknames, that if you know somebody, you tend to know them by a nickname. So Little T came to me as, what I was going to call this character. And the whole book just rolled and developed, and I did not struggle with the writing of this. I actually had a very good time, and I can tell y'all there wasn't a moment in what ended up being probably close to a year, because I was doing the requisite work for Morning Dove while I was writing Little T. And I can just tell y'all that the whole process for me was a wonderful, wonderful time, because to be in California and to have ties to Memphis and my friends there. And, I know a lot of people there, and growing up in the 1970s in Memphis was smaller. It was more family oriented. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody went to the same schools, and it's different now. They've developed places outside of Memphis like Cordova and Eads and Moscow, Tennessee, and these places that you never went to when I was growing up. And so to be in California and writing about that area, where I grew up, was just a wonderful experience for me. And I'm so appreciative of where I grew up and how I grew up and the people that were around me, that in my own way, even though there were troubling times in Little T, in my own way, I am singing the South's praises by focusing on her nuances, if you will. And so, yes, that was my process in writing Little T. And the whole story really created itself to the point where I didn't see the ending coming at all. I did not see that ending coming. And if anybody hasn't read it, I don't want to give it away. But I can say so far that for everybody that has contacted me, and there have been plenty that have written me via Facebook, strangers, and are gone through my website and found me, the first thing they always say is, I did not see that ending coming. And I think it's because neither did I. I didn't see it coming at all either. But it created itself, and what ended up happening with Little T, unbeknownst to me. Now, keep in mind that I wrote that book 2 years ago. And I'm not the kind of writer that's ever going to ever go into any type of statement one way or the other. I'm not going to take a side with religion or politics or, race issues or any of that. I will never take a side, because as a writer, my gift to the reader is I'm going to pose this for you and not insult your intelligence, and give you the opportunity to discern for yourself what your vantage point is. And again, I go back to the idea of comparing notes. And so, I am telling the story. Well, what ended up happening with Little T was the May 1st release. And of course, I don't need to tell y'all what the cultural climate was in that area. Civil unrest, certainly, the COVID pandemic, I believe it made everybody feel more fearful and insular, and therefore emotions were running high. And so I had quite a few people, ask me if I was trying to make some statement about the races, and I wasn't. I was telling a story. And yet, if I think back, and I still say the same thing, I was saying at the time that there's great hope, and that in my opinion, there has been progress with regard to the social mores and considerations of relationships between the races, in that the entire story of Little T has a thrust that is all around the fact that there was considerations that a biracial relationship was socially unacceptable at that time in that region. And we go through all of this only to find out at the end of Little T that had the story of Little T taken place today, it would almost have negated all of it, because it is now acceptable. Biracial relationships are now acceptable. And back when, there were still people that raised an eyebrow. And so I had more of an inclination towards the idea of the hope and evolution that we have, in fact, certainly in terms of, cultural opinion. There's a lot more right now today that's acceptable than say 20, 30 years ago. So if there was any type of message in it, it was that at the time that I wrote it. And so most people see that with little t, and and don't. So far, I haven't had many people take me to task on that, but I did have one reviewer of a magazine that accused me of all kinds of things. It was only one, and that kind of thing's bound to happen. And of course, authors can never respond. You just smile and thank you for your opinion. But yeah, that's been the interesting part of Little T, was the timeliness of the book coming out when it did, and it being about what it was about, and myself not having a plan with any of it. So you live and learn in the writing world, and that's been my experience with Little T thus far. And I'd love to answer any questions.
Well, I'll ask something. You said you love the name. Where did you get the names for all the characters? I'm always curious where authors get their names. It's like the best friends, and also, Little T and her family.
Okay. Well, with the three girls, I did grow up with a family whose mother went by the name Rennie, and her eldest daughter went by the name Rennie. Their real name was Corinna, and the grandmother was named Corinna, and they passed that name down in families. And I always liked the name Rennie, and so there is that. And I have a good friend in real life. It's the only point that was remotely true, whose name is Khaki Wright, and she's a doctor of veterinary medicine. She's the definitive horse doctor in Olive Branch, Mississippi. Khaki, she grew up right in the regional horse circuit, and horses. That was her entire life. And today she literally, owns like a horse rehabilitation clinic on this property in Olive Branch, and it's wonderful. And as a human being, Khaki's got all the answers. I mean, she's one of these people, the world is this way, and that's the end of it, and I find that quite refreshing, because I live in the gray areas, and I believe in everything, and I assume everything's true, and I don't have a strong opinion about much anything one way or the other, because I live, wanting to foster an open mind, and one that does not box things in, and one that does not assume, in my way or the highway. And, I think that all of life is an exploration anyway, and nobody's really got any answers, except for my friend Khaki, which I find worth writing about. And so I had the character of Rennie based on Khaki, and she knows it. And I told her going into it, and she didn't care. So, but the story is fictitious. And so there was that. Thelonious is musical. I like the way it rolls on the tongue. It sounds to me Southern. It sounds to me old. And it sounds to me entirely plausible that if one were named Thelonious, and they didn't have a son, they had a daughter, that they would name her Thelonia. And that's where that came from. And Ava, I've always liked the name Ava. And my editor with Firehouse Southern Fiction, who signed me with Morning Dove and has championed me in a way that I wonder if I'm worthy. I wonder if anybody's worthy, how wonderful this woman has been. Her name is Eva Marie Everson. And I spent the first 8 months of our relationship calling her Ava. And I don't know why. I just couldn't handle Eva. I couldn't do it. And I kept calling her Ava. So I named the character Ava, thinking, well, if nothing else, she's going to get the joke. And so there was that. But the Wakefield plantation. Now, in this day and age, we don't use the word plantation anymore. That's one of the PC no-nos going on right now. You're not supposed to say that word. And so I did one thing when I was writing Little T, and that was when I went to Memphis for Morning Dove and did I think I did like 9 events down there. I went to Como, Mississippi, and a mutual friend of myself and Sledge Taylor knew that I was coming, and Sledge Taylor offered to show me around Como, Mississippi, which he did. And he's a gentleman farmer and a scientist and a historian and an artist and a botanist. And I'd put Sledge at maybe 64 years old at the moment. And his family on both sides all but put the railroad ties in the railroad tracks that run through Como, Mississippi. They have been there, both sides of his family, forever. One side, the Taylors, the other side, the Sledges. So he's Sledge Taylor. We went into Holy Innocents Church in Como, and the stained glass windows, the cathedral, gorgeous, russet and blue and gold, and, you know, scroll in Italian at the bottom, dedicated to Sledge Taylor's family, you know, his great, you know, Robert Taylor. I mean, this guy, you know, if I could have dreamed up a better guide for Como, Mississippi, this man took me everywhere, and he's a busy guy. And I spent 5 hours with him while he was driving me around, even on the outskirts of Como. You can walk through the town of Como, Mississippi in 15 minutes, you know, and Sledge happened to own whatever he owned. I mean, this building and this building and this building, and that was passed down in my family. They own the general store, which is no longer a general store. It's closed, but he kept all of the antiquities in there from more than 100 years ago. So we walk into this general store, it was cavernous, and there are these mule harnesses hanging from the walls, and there are desks, and, you know, these barrels, I don't know what were in there, and there was crystal and porcelain and silver unpolished that had just been sitting in this like general store, and now a warehouse. Sledge happened to own it. And the one thing he did, which I could not photograph, was he took me, and he didn't tell me he was doing this. He just drove, you know, took a right off of Old Panola Road. We go up a gravel driveway, and all of a sudden rolling hills are on either side. And there's a pond, and there's a wonderful cabin in front of that pond. And then we go further up, and there's this mansion, and it's columned, and the lawn in front of it looks like a golf course. And I'm thinking, this is unbelievable. Well, a man materializes out of the blue, and he's white, and he called Sledge Mr. Sledge, which I found fascinating. And the owners were not in residence. This ended up being a weekend home, if you will, that had been in the McFadden Boyle family. Well, it turns out I grew up in Memphis with both families. They married each other and owned this place in Como, Mississippi that I believe is pre-Civil War. Well, would you like to see the inside of it? You know, they're not in residence, and Sledge just walks in, you know, the screen door. In your life, you have never seen. Now, it was shabby chic, shop worn elegance. The ceilings were high. There was crown moldings on the ceilings. The doorways were arched. You know, hardwood floors with the area rugs, and, you know, nothing shiny and new at all in this, but perfect. You know, the bedrooms upstairs, divine, absolutely, the whole place. I mean, every piece of furniture they had in it. And again, it wasn't antiques and like you're in a museum and it's breathtaking and you can't believe it. It wasn't that. It was almost like, well, this is the furniture that was here 100 years ago and we just kept it. You know, that's how it looked. And so that was fascinating to me. And I heard that they have a problem with ladybugs, and to the point that there are certain times of the years when the ladybugs hatch their eggs on the screens, on the window screens, to the point where you can't see out. And it happens every year, and it's a problem. And I'm thinking, that's fascinating. And we're driving down the road, and he said, well, when the eastern boxwood turtle, when you see it come out of these woods and starts to cross the road, you know, we know it's going to rain. And I'm thinking, it's the little things that I heard from Sledge Taylor while driving around Como, Mississippi, but that gave me a wonderful sense of place. And growing up in Memphis, I certainly know the climate and the terrain and that kind of thing. So it was a really fortuitous thing for me to spend that time in Como while I was writing Little T. And I was already familiar with Heber Springs, Arkansas, where the girls were at the lake in modern time. But with regard to Little T's backstory, that day I spent with Sledge Taylor was absolutely pivotal for the way that book turned out. So, yeah, and I find that, a sense of place in any novel is very important because, houses can be characters, regions are characters. They certainly explain character, if nothing else. And so, yeah, the whole writing of Little T for me was a very joyous and sort of soulful and nostalgic experience, and that I'm always trying to capture it. I'm trying to say it, I'm trying to put into words what it is that's so specific and special about the South. And as a person, I greet the world through the way it feels. There are a lot of people that greet the world visually, or some people are attuned to it, clairaudience kind of a thing. And for me, and I think it may be because I'm incredibly tightly wired as a human being. I'm very small boned and don't weigh but about 110. I'm just a little thing, and so I'm extremely sensitive to any type of shift around me. And so that for me is that when I write anything, I'm always going from the way that it feels. I'm not trying to, and then you couple that with a love for language or the pursuit of really wanting to accurately say whatever it is you're trying to say. And so, with both those things, it therefore becomes an emotional experience for me, that I am not a cerebral writer in the least. I'm doing it all through feel. And now that, having just said that, it occurs to me that's probably why I've never worked with an outline. Is I don't go into it with any other objective other than to parlay. This is the way it feels. This is the story. This is how it feels. And so, it's important to me that I arrive at the accurate paragraphs and the sentences within those paragraphs that adequately impart to the reader the way that it feels, because I think reading also at its best is a moving experience, and on some levels, therefore, an emotional experience.
About another
I wanted
question?
to say that I'll just make a comment. I want to say, and my internet is unstable, so I'm hoping this is coming across. I loved your style of writing. I loved your descriptions. And it's interesting that you talk about Pat Conroy because he was that kind of writer also. But what really stood out to me was your style of writing.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I mean, I'm glad it worked. I'm glad it worked for somebody. Yeah, I think that I want language to be beautiful. Although, I mean, I really enjoy Ron Rash. Today I was listening to David Joy and his podcast and Michael Ferris Smith and these writers that are very salt of the earth and very spare, and I honor that and I admire that. I tend to be a lot more long-winded as a person, and I think I'm long-winded as a writer too. And you see it all and you get it all, and you have to be prepared to handle it all from readers. If you look on Goodreads, you know, I had somebody say, her language is too flowery for me. And I think, well, of course it is. Okay. Because, yeah, I mean, it's the way that I speak and I write the way that I think, you know, so it's all sort of one thing happening. And that for me, it's a very authentic experience, and that, you know, I am just laying the story down in the way that I would tell it if you were talking to me. So I'm not trying to be, as a writer, anything that I'm not as a person, you know. So, which is funny, I'm married to a Yankee from Chicago who has said to me more often than not, Claire, what's the point? Because I'm such a long-winded speaker that I'm bringing in what the cat did 2 years ago into the answer to his question, you know, where's a pencil? And all of a sudden away I go, and I'm talking about, I don't know what I'm talking about, and neither does he, you know. So I tend to do that as a person. And I think it's because I experience the world conceptually. You know, I live in the concepts. And, you know, and my husband's the exact opposite. You know, it's a wonderful, wonderful balance. You know, to meet us, you'd say, what in the world are these two people doing together? But it's perfect. It's perfect because of the balance. But and I think that most artists do interpret the world and experience the world conceptually. And I think that artists have a rougher time in the world because of that, because the world is not set up for that, you know. And that's why we've heard, you know, forever, you know, the tortured artist, you know, and alcoholism and artistry goes hand in hand. And, you know, I think it's all sort of understandable. And I think it's because artists, they're just wired that way. They experience the world and therefore view it conceptually. There's such a big picture going on. And within that big picture, there are endless possibilities. And I think that's why the artists of the world have problems, is just because of that.
I have a question. Why did you decide to put a gay character in your story?
It just happened. It just happened that I wanted it to be a contentious relationship that had a reason that wasn't clear to the narrator, and she grew into her assessment of that, and it's within that particular dynamic that was specific to and inclusive of just those characters, not anybody else. I liked the idea of, if one is gay and they have not owned that, well, then some of these things are going to come out sideways. And so that was pretty much what I was saying earlier. It's the same idea of some of the problems that people have that are unreconciled because they have not faced their problems. They are therefore, it's understandable how they might be prone to addiction and some of these things, because if you don't meet and greet and call your enemy by name, whatever your problem is, then things are going to come out sideways. And I like the idea of that. And that's how that relationship ended up in terms of John in the book and his sister Celia not really having any type of understanding as to why her brother was so untrustworthy and kind of spiteful. And she had no idea what was at the root of this. And so the idea of John not yet making peace with his homosexuality, his stuff came out sideways. His relationships were affected. And I think that is, you know, nothing new there under the sun in terms of, I mean, it's applicable to all kinds of things. It explains all kinds of things, which is why You know, again, I come back. If you don't take care of your business, of what it is you need to heal in your own life, you know, be prepared for it to wreak havoc somewhere, because you're not taking care of business. And if you would just take care of business, then a lot of this stuff that happens, it wouldn't be perpetuated. So it was the idea of that as well, of, you know, John having a secret.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't necessarily a conscious decision going into it. And why don't I create a gay person that, you know, it wasn't necessarily conscious. It evolved, you know, from the story itself.
It's interesting though that they seem to handle his gayness in a way better than racism. You know, now, I don't know, maybe I misread that, but I kind of felt that they kind of, you know, that's how big racism was, I guess. Or you see what I'm saying? Is
Of course, yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah, I mean, it's so much bigger that they could handle the other, but they couldn't handle black and white. You know,
Right.
It's a lot where we are.
And it's hard for me, you know, because I grew up in the deep South, and it's hard for me to say what the person standing next to me was thinking, you know, I mean, or the person down the road, what they were thinking. So it's very, very hard to make a generalization, I think, about that. And I know that everybody is entitled to and has their own perception and therefore their own perspective on it. And so I think to put, you know, a big generalization that, you know, the country of America is this way, you know, again, because I greet the world in concepts, I find that a little presumptuous, you know, and yeah. And so we have to be careful with the language that we use. And not only that, but we also have to be aware with the language that other people use so that we can decide, you know, what our stance on that is, type of a thing. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a cultural state of being. It was a cultural state of affairs that I was writing about. And I was not passing judgment on it. And I would never do that, you know. And as a writer, I know plenty of authors that do. And that's, you know, their prerogative. But for me, I like to devise the state of affairs from an objective view. And it makes me, you know, as a writer, more of a witness than it is somebody who's taken a stance, because readers are intelligent people.
Mm-hmm.
Readers are very intelligent. And so that's the reason why I don't say, you know, here's what you should think, because, you know, I'm not responsible for what anybody thinks. I'm showing up with the story.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just thought it was fascinating how that was handled. I'm talking about the characters, not you, but the characters,
Right.
How the characters handled it, you know?
Well, I like the grandmother, and I like the idea of her entire stance on life being one of that came from a premise of defense. And what's at the bottom when people are defensive, you know, look for it, because it's there. It's fear at the bottom of their defense mechanism. And so when people are lashing out at anybody, and certainly as a, you know, at a culture or as a race, especially in the case of the grandmother, you know, if you look at her history, what is she hiding? What is she afraid of? You know, and it was her dirt poor background that she had married up and never forgot. And so, you know, I was thinking about, if you look at somebody that came from absolutely nothing, and all of a sudden they find themselves in an elevated position, that you can see why they might get some type of satisfaction from looking down on, you know, people they think are inferior, because they you know, they want to have somebody inferior because they feel inferior about themselves. So that was the idea for the grandmother, you know, having such a stance as that. And she was pretty hardcore, in how she viewed, Black people as a whole. And she had an opinion, and it was one way. So it certainly set up, a very untenable dynamic to have a grandmother right there square in the middle of the family saying, we should all view it this way.
Do you have any other projects in the works?
I've been writing first person essays, and I'm working on short stories. I actually have a manuscript finished, and I may completely take it apart and turn it into a bunch of short stories, and I may not. I haven't really decided yet. But the good news is I'm at the point now where I'm having fun with little T, with, talking with people like y'all. I mean, it's just been wonderful. It really has. I'm one of these people who's actually enjoyed, this time promoting this way. It's ended up being, a very pleasant experience for me. And so I'm sort of at the tail end of that. Typically when you release a book, they say that the lion's share of the promotional work is going to happen 3 months before the book comes out, 3 to 4 months before the book comes out, because you're laying the foundation and you're trying to make sure that it gets into the hands of people that are going to review it and that it's going to appear in places. And then when the book comes out, 3 months, and we see, what we've got here. Because you don't want to be screaming from the rooftops 6 months after your book is out. Everybody's clear, your book is out, everybody gets it, So yeah, that's the window. It seems to be 6 or 7 months, all told, with the book. And I'm coming up at the tail end of that now. And so I'm really starting to say, all right, well, let me just work on what it is that it occurs to me to work on. And so I don't have a contract with somebody where I'm obligated to do anything. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of the good news, because, I can explore where it is I'm going next, because I feel like I'm always going to be writing something at some point. But, for me, it needs to be a labor of love. And when it becomes work, that's not any good. You don't want it to be work. You want it to be an expression of, this is who I am, and I'm reaching out, and I hope you like this. I hope you like this. And, for me, it's that simple. The writing process is, I love it. I enjoy it. It seems to be the fire that animates me. And so let me do it, and I'll see where it goes. That's my whole attitude with it. I'm just glad anybody likes it. And y'all leave those reviews for me too. They matter. I bet you hear that a lot.
Yeah. Yes. What was I asking? Oh, I'm not sure. I forgot. I was listening and thought went right out of my head.
It's that crown you've got sitting on your head.
Yes, let's take
That's what it is.
Okay.
You got to balance that crown.
Yeah, you're right. Does anyone have anything that they would like to ask Claire before we end our session?
Claire, can you talk about Hayward?
I certainly can. I love that. Well, actually, I had a brother named Haynes in real life, and he is no longer on God's green earth, God rest him. And he was 18 months older than I. And in my own way, I put Haynes in the book Morning Dove, which, did you hear me talk about Pat earlier, or did you join us later? Yeah.
No.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that, when I'm like hugging your neck and saying, sister, you don't know what your family did for me. I mean, I mean it in my soul. And I told you that when I met Pat, I was like, you're Irish Catholic, you're from County Galway, you were born in the month of October, alcoholism is in your family, it's in mine too. I mean, just the common threads that Pat and I had, it was the uncanniest thing that I can say out of everybody I've ever met in life. I've never had so much in common with somebody who's a complete stranger. But then, of course, you couldn't call Pat Conroy a complete stranger to anybody, because hello world, this is who I am. So everybody felt like they knew him, you know, and that was the reason that you know, Hayward in the book, in Little T, and I called him Finley and Morning Dove, is my brother Haynes in my own way, in terms of my own perception, and that Haynes as a human being glowed. I mean, he was lit with a spirit and you know, charisma, and incredibly intelligent and charismatic and dynamic and funny and all these kinds of things, and had this kind of insight into what it is that's really going on. You know, okay, this person's doing this, but let me tell you what they're really thinking. Let me tell you what motivates them. I mean, you know, I liked the idea of that. And further, Kathleen, when I read John Knowles' A Separate Peace, and I was very young, the character of Phineas hit me in the same way, in terms of when you got these blue-eyed, golden, swaggering, the world is my oyster, the lion is by the tail, young men, when they're in their prime, there is nothing more beautiful. There is no more beautiful creature on earth than these men that are like that. They own the world. They are fearless. And I liked the idea of that, because, you know, growing up, and I had 3 older brothers, but my brother Haynes was that way as a human being. And I found it refreshing, and I also found it inspirational, because I had a fearless brother. I think I grew up a fearless girl, and it didn't occur to me as a girl that I was going to be limited in any way, you know, because I was following Haynes around, and he was fearless, and that was my experience of being in the world, you know, and I'm still that way in terms of, you know, women's anything. It doesn't occur to me for 1 second that I am limited in any way by being a female. I happen to know as a person I'm not. You know, that's how I feel. So I don't know about the people around me. And so, you know, that to each their own and all of that. But I do think that when one is blessed to grow up with brothers, you know, that there's something that's just so anchoring and stabilizing about a sister that has a brother, you know, and when you're growing up, because men, you know, there's something when they're young, and they're finding their footing in the world, you know. And so that was the reason with Hayward in the book, that I wanted him to be kind of happy-go-lucky and fearless and charming and pirate smile and all these things. You know, the kind of character that it's not that he's getting away with anything, it's that he's on top of everything. He's just on top of his game. And so, and I think musicians, I have a fondness for musicians. I think they're like, you know, channels from the angelic realm. I mean, these people that really play an instrument or really have a God-given good voice, I mean, they're otherworldly creatures to me, you know, that you are an instrument. You know, if you got a good voice like that, and if you can master playing an instrument, you know, I am in awe of those that do that and do that well. And that's why I made Hayward, you know, a musician as well, because there's something really special, I think, about musicians. And so all of those things that I had the sense of who Hayward was. And again, because I wrote Little T without an outline, you know, the story given it kind of created itself. And I think that's just, you know, my choice on how I, you know, enter the arena of the magical world of, you know, novel writing, is that I allow it all to roll, you know, and let's see where this goes, because I can feel who these characters are. I have a real good sense of them. to the point where I can hear what they're going to say and how they talk. And it all stems from who they are. And if I have a sense of who they are, then it starts, it sets up a chain of events. It sets up a dynamic that's plausible, or at least plausible to me. And so, yeah, that was, and I like the name Hayward. I think that's a pretty name. I like, it tends to be common in the South that the men will have family names. Their first name typically comes from, their mothers. Their mother was Anne Hayward, so they named their first son Hayward, kind of a thing. That's common as well.
Thank you so much for your time tonight and wonderful discussion. I truly enjoyed it. And thank you all for joining in. And
thank you so much for having me.
Oh, our pleasure.
It's
Thank
just,
you.
Tara, I have seen your name bantered around and everybody loves you, and now I know why. and that y'all are a Buford, I'm just,
All right,
I hope to come see y'all. I hope to have a reason sometime in the future, because it is such a wonderful town. It's just beautiful there. I mean, you're really lucky to live there. I mean, you have to have a reason to live there. I don't know. Do y'all get many outsiders that just, hi, I'm from Massachusetts. I think I'll just move to Beaufort. I mean, do you see that?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I think probably, I don't know who's a true Beaufortonian here.
Is that right? Well, I remember we stayed at the, my friend who used to live out in Malibu. She's originally from Dallas, and now she moved to Austin. So anyway, but for 7 years she was living, down the street from me, and I had her come with me to Pat's 70th birthday. I said, I just got her on the phone. She said, hello. I said, you want to go to Beaufort, South Carolina? She's like, okay, all right. So we went and we stayed at the Red House. And then the next year when I went, and I felt, because Pat, had died, and I felt, this is how funny, I am. I felt it was the right thing to do to support the Pat Conroy Literary Center's first year. I mean, the Pat Conroy Literary Festival, the first year. And I was going to go and stand up and be counted, as a supporter, because, with Pat Conroy, A, it rocked the world, and B, it blindsided everybody. It blindsided everybody when he died. And it was like, what? I mean, this just can't be. And it's a long way to go from Malibu to, is it a long way to go? But I just felt that it was really, the noble thing to do in terms of supporting forever, what is to come. And part of that reason was because I was there at his birthday, just the whole thing just meant something to me.
My screen.
Yeah, but we stayed at the Anchorage in the bottom, in the basement. They have those rooms in the basement of the Anchorage, and we were down there. And we walked all over, just walked out the Anchorage's door, or the Red House's door, as it were, and just walked those neighborhoods. And I'm just going, good God, this place, unbelievable. It was just beautiful. I mean, and it looks idyllic. It really does. Just a beautiful town. Loved the feel of it. Loved everything about it. And I do hope I have cause sometime come down there and see y'all in person.
Yes.
I think so. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Claire,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone else, thank you. See you next month.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. We'll leave the meeting. Bye-bye, y'all. Take care.